What you are looking at here is one of a series of demonstrations that are being held around the world today, from London to New York to Berlin and Hamburg to Mexico City to Vancouver and Toronto, to protest the arrest and charging of Nigerian activists with treason for the supposed crime of participating in and helping organise the End Bad Governance protests in August against the starvation policies of the Bola Tinubu regime in Nigeria. At this time, over 40 protesters were shot dead. 11 activists from different organisations, including the National Union of Electrical Employees, face the death penalty today on trumped-up treason charges for their role in these protests. Many, if not all, of these international protests, like the one here, have been initiated by the Partisan Defence Committee. We are a class struggle, non-sectarian, legal and social defence organisation which champions cases and causes in the interests of the whole of the working people, here and around the world. This is in accord with the Marxist revolutionary political views of the Spartacist League, who are the Australian section of the International Communist League, Fourth Internationalist. Our job, as we see it, is to bring together the broadest possible forces behind the power of the organised working class to defend those who are targeted by this capitalist system that is built on exploitation and oppression. And this, regardless of any divergence with the views of those targeted. So this protest here today has been endorsed by the following organisations: African Solidarity Collective, Black People's Union, Class Conscious, Free Palestine Coalition NAM, League for the Fourth International Australia, Maritime Union of Australia Victoria Branch, Maritime Union of Australia Sydney Branch, Revolutionary Communist Organisation, Spartacist League of Australia, Victorian Socialists and Unionists for Palestine Vic. We will be hearing from speakers and statements from some of these organisations. So without further ado, I would like to introduce first of all a spokesman for the Partisan Defence Committee.
Thanks, comrade. This is a call to action. Nigerian protesters are facing the death penalty. On behalf of the Partisan Defence Committee, I'd like to welcome everyone to this action in defence of the Nigerian protesters, some of whom are facing the death penalty on trumped-up treason charges. Our thanks to all those across the left and Labour movement who have endorsed and helped build this rally. There might be differences among us on key questions, but we're together here for a common cause in the knowledge that the left and Labour movement must respond urgently in defence of Nigerian activists targeted for the so-called crime of protesting against imperialist dictated starvation policies imposed by the Nigerian government of Bola Tinubu. The brutal crackdown by the Nigerian regime, the shooting of up to 40 protesters by security forces, the arrest, imprisonment and torture of thousands is an outrage in the eyes of working people and the oppressed the world over. It must be answered by the most vigorous counteraction from the international left and trade union movement everywhere. This protest is one of several happening around the world, from Mexico City to New York City, to London, to Hamburg, to Berlin, and here in Melbourne. A number of these cities are port cities. This is important when we look at the endorsements we have got for this action. The Nigerian government is threatening protest leaders with the most draconian penalties. Socialist activists from the Youth Rights Campaign, such as Michael Lennon, Adaramoye, and others such as Daniel Akandi of Solidarity Network for Workers' Rights, are among those facing the death penalty. Showing that this crackdown is aimed at intimidating the entire workers' movement in Nigeria, the government also detained Labour Congress President Joe Ajaero and electrical union leader Opalua Simeon, who also faces the death penalty charge. Even a pro-Labour bookshop owner, Joe Wynne, and his assistant Adeyemi Abayomi have been charged with seeking to overthrow the government. Abayomi too is facing a possible death sentence. We demand, drop all the charges now, release all the arrested prisoners. What can push back the Nigerian government's repression and reverse the austerity measures is the social power of the organised working class. Workers in imperialist countries like Australia can play a crucial part. In that regard, we welcome trade union support. The Victorian and Sydney branches of the MUA, the Maritime Union of Australia, endorsed this rally. These endorsements have added to protest statements already sent from the International Longshoremen's Union, the ILWU, from the US. That is power in the making. Now is the time for these solidarity statements to be turned into action on the streets, signalling that the labour movement here and internationally will not stand idly by and watch the livelihoods and the very lives of workers, youth and the oppressed, wherever they may be, to be destroyed by the dictates of finance capital. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank and other imperialist bloodsuckers. Actions by workers here and elsewhere can give heart to the organised workers in Nigeria to place themselves at the head of the protest movement. Clearly, it is in the direct interests of Nigerian workers to oppose the murderous repression and mass imprisonment of protesters as part of their own struggle against the Tinubu regime's attacks. Resolute opposition from Nigerian workers to Tinubu and his imperialist masters would strike a blow for all the masses of the African continent. Militant action by Nigerian workers would inspire and strengthen workers in struggle from South Africa to Kenya and beyond to throw off the stranglehold the imperialists have over workers and oppressed in their countries. The very same imperialist regimes who prop up the likes of Tinubu are backing the genocidal onslaught by the Israeli regime against the Palestinians. While the imperialist leeches rape and pillage countries from the Philippines to Nigeria, Argentina and beyond, they savagely suppress opposition at home to their marauding abroad. Here in Melbourne, the Victorian Labor government, along with the federal Labor government, has been attempting to destroy the militant CFMEU, the Building Workers Union. This state Labor government spent $30 million to unleash a brutal police assault on the 11th September protests to disrupt land forces by pro-Palestinian opponents of Australian militarism. Scores were arrested and up to 100 charged. Now, leading up to the trial here in Melbourne on 21 November, there is a highly orchestrated media and state witch hunt targeting ever more protesters. There needs to be united front actions. Hundreds, even thousands of opponents of militarism, defenders of Palestine, the left and workers' movement should mobilise outside the courthouse to demand drop all the charges against DLF protesters. Defend all opponents of genocide in Gaza. These deeply repressive times demand the broadest possible, non-sectarian class struggle defence, which puts no faith in the justice of the capitalist courts or the imperialist international community, and all faith in the social power of the working class mobilised in its own interests and all of those under attack. From Melbourne to Manila in the Philippines, where today leftist and Akbayan opponents of US imperialist military forces have been arrested and face trumped-up charges, to Abuja and Lagos in Nigeria, we say, an injury to one is an injury to all. Down with the crackdown in Nigeria. Drop all the charges now. Release all the arrested protesters.
Drop the charges. Free the protesters. Drop the charges. Free them now. Drop the charges. Free the protesters. Drop the charges. Free them now. Okay, thank you. Now, crucial to staying the hand of the blood-soaked Nigerian government is to be able to mobilise the voice of the international union movement. I'd like to read a protest statement to the Nigerian government that was issued by Local 10 of the US International Longshore and Warehouse Union shortly after the crackdown on the EndBadGovernance protests. This is the union that covers the loading and unloading of all cargo on the west coast of the US. This is the letter dated 19 August addressed to the Nigerian embassy in the US. Dear Sir or Madam, on August 7, government security forces staged a nighttime raid ransacking the headquarters of the Nigerian Labour Congress, seizing printed materials and other documents. The International Longshore and Warehouse Union Local 10, which represents longshoremen working in the San Francisco Bay Area, protests in the strongest terms this attack against our fellow trade unionists. We demand that all the seized materials be returned and that there be no further reprisals against the NLC. This raid came just hours after the NLC held a meeting critical of your government's repression against students and others who have been protesting over the last 2 weeks against the austerity measures imposed by your government. Scores of protesters have been killed. Hundreds more, including prominent protest leaders, have been arrested and many are still in jail. These include protest leaders such as Adaramoya Michael Lennon, National Coordinator of the Youth Rights Campaign, Mosio Sodiq, Elio Opalua, and Babatunde Oloaho, OSB Sankara. According to the latest reports, Michael, Sadiq and Alioa remain in custody. The NLC rightly condemned your attempt to criminalise protest. We have active members of our union who were born in Nigeria and who maintain ties with their homeland. The international labour movement is watching. We demand an end to the repression and freedom for all detainees. Hands off the NLC. And that's signed by the Trent Willis, the president of ILWU Local 10 in the US. Next speaker I have is from a speaker from the Revolutionary Communist Organisation who have endorsed this protest.
Greetings, comrades. To give a brief introduction, my name is Brun. I'm one of the managing editors of our newspaper, Partisan, and I'm very proud to be an internationalist. Comrades, we are gathered here today to demand that the Nigerian government release all imprisoned protesters who raised the basic demands of being able to afford food and petrol. Against this, the reactionary Tinubu government has unleashed the blood-soaked forces of the Nigerian state, murdering more than 40 workers and youth. This is a blatant attack against the workers' movement, revealing the naked capitalist brutality of the Tinubu government, a brutality that is born from the system itself. Among those charged and arrested and potentially charged with treason include Michael Lennon Anobre. In some ways, it's appropriate that the trial date is on the 8th of November, a day and 107 years after the October Revolution. It was also appropriate because it reveals the only way that we can end bad governance, not only in Nigeria, but here in Australia and around the world, through the working class in all its beauty and might, rising up and sweeping capitalism into the dustbin of history. Nigeria is the linchpin of West Africa. The tensions between ECOWAS and the Alliance of Sahel states is a clear demonstration of the crucial role that Nigeria plays in maintaining imperialist exploitation in sub-Saharan Africa, even as Nigeria itself is ruthlessly exploited by the imperial court. It is this growing contradiction in the role that Nigeria plays in the global economy that has fueling this economic crisis. And with the global financial order spearheaded by the reactionary IMF pushing austerity across the world, things will only get worse. As the global crisis of capitalism intensifies, so too will the struggle as the self-interest of the working class and the bourgeois grow increasingly antagonistic. Any attempts to conciliate to the exploiters and capitalists of the world is doomed and will only drag humanity down into the capitalist abyss of barbarism. In a brief honour of the comrades in the Spartacist League, I would like to quote Trotsky. It seems that the world today is screaming, "Death to utopia! Death to faith! Death to love! Death to hope! This, the 21st century, thunders and salvos and fire and the rumblings of guns. Surrender, you pathetic dreamer. Here I am, the long-awaited 21st century, your future." Yet you know what we say to this thunder of doom and slaughter. You are merely the present. It may seem we're about to suffer another world historic defeat, and that the victory of Bonapartism in the United States represents a step backwards. But against that reactionary depression, it is the task of communists to point to the road forwards. Yes, the left is shattered, but yes, the working class is on the back foot. Yet as Rosa Luxemburg said, in a period of even worse defeat for the working class, when the parties and leaders that had built up the mass workers and socialist movements of the early 19th century gave in to state loyalism and patriotism. But we are not lost, and we will be victorious if we have not unlearned how to learn. The fight must be to merge the workers' movement with the socialist movement, not just here, but everywhere. In every front of the proletariat struggle against the capitalist beast, we need to fight for a mass workers' movement, united under the aegis of a revolutionary party. In Nigeria, when Tinubu tries to crush the working class beneath the jackboot of the state and the vice of austerity, we must fight. Here, when Albanese tries to crush the CNFU, tries to accelerate the destruction of First Nations of this continent, we must fight. And in America, where Trump heralds another attempt of the capitalist state to reconsolidate their control, the working class must fight back. In Palestine, where Zionism falls deeper into its own naked barbarism, we must fight. We are the builders of the coming world. We are the planter, the seed in the field. We are the future, and we are the action to get us there. We are the workers of the world, and we will never be defeated. We must fight for the intensification of class struggles across the world, for the principled reunification of the socialist movement. For just as the road to Jerusalem runs through Cairo, so too does the road to workers' power run through Lagos, just as it runs through Melbourne, Leningrad, Berlin, New York, Buenos Aires and Beijing. The old world is in crisis, but it isn't dying yet. Let us build a force to ensure that it will. Don't mourn, organise. End bad governance. Freedom to the protesters. Forward to an African Socialist Republic. Forward to a Socialist Republic in the Middle East. Forward to a Socialist Republic in Australia. One struggle, one fight.
Workers of the world unite!
One struggle, one fight.
Workers of
Workers
the
of the world unite. One struggle, one fight. Workers of the world unite. One struggle, one fight. Workers of the world unite. Thank you. I now have a statement from comrades in South Africa. This is from the Committee to Defend Xolani Khoza, an activist from the Economic Freedom Fighters who is today facing terrorism charges from the new South African Government of National Unity, which, alongside the ANC, includes the heirs of the apartheid regime, such as the Democratic Alliance. Xolani was targeted by the state after he played a leading role in a strike by Sakawu, the Union for Hospitality, Retail and Distribution Workers in South Africa. Their statement reads as follows. 7 November. The Committee to Defend Xolani Khoza in South Africa joins anti-imperialists and leftists internationally in condemning the bloody state repression against EndBadGovernance protesters in Nigeria. After killing more than 40 and arresting nearly 2,500 people, including children, who took part in the protests against neoliberal shock therapy, the Nigerian government is threatening protest organisers with the death penalty. Drop the charges now, release all protesters. We find it particularly despicable that the Bola Tinubu government has slandered the protesters as being steered by foreign powers in order to justify crushing dissent. In reality, the government itself is the biggest agent of foreign domination in Nigeria, carrying out the neoliberal dictates of its imperialist overlords in the US and the UK. We see the fight against the crackdown in Nigeria as tied to the one we have been waging to defend fighter Xolani Khoza against repression at the hands of the pro-imperialist ANC-DA coalition government here in South Africa. Merely for posting a TikTok video calling for protest against the government, Xolani was abducted and hit with trumped-up charges including incitement to commit terrorism and public violence. As workers and oppressed people face stepped-up attacks from pro-imperialist regimes around the continent, it is urgent to mobilise mass, united front defence action to push back. Fighting for black freedom is not terrorism. Committee to Defend Xolani Khoza, Mbombela and Johannesburg, South Africa. Thank you. Fighting for black freedom is not terrorism. Fighting for black freedom is not terrorism. Fighting for black freedom is not terrorism. This rally has also been endorsed by the likes of the Black People's Union. I'm not sure if they care to step up to the microphone and have a few words. A number of different organisations have come together over this cause.
Walawani, everybody. I'm Nayaga Kieran, Indian Waniwandi in Yordan. My name's Kieran. I'm one of the founders of the Black People's Union and a proud Waniwandi custodian from the UN nation, which is now on the south coast of what you all know as New South Wales. I just want to start off by paying my respects and acknowledging that we are on occupied lands here. These are the lands of the Kulin Nation. Australia is an occupation itself. It has been an occupation ever since 1788 when the first fleet rode upon the shores up in Botany Bay. And just like our brothers and sisters from the African continent, we are still struggling for our liberation as well, and one day we too will be free. Brothers and sisters, friends and allies, today we gather not only to raise our voices against the Nigerian government, but to speak out for all people who are oppressed by the systems of neo-colonialism that continue to dominate our world. The situation in Nigeria, with its government's policies that starve its own people, its brutal crackdowns on activists, and its continued submission to Western interests, is a direct reflection of the ongoing legacy of colonialism that we, as Indigenous people, know all too well. Let me begin by acknowledging that the history of colonisation in Nigeria is not so different from the history of colonisation in so-called Australia. For centuries, both of our peoples were subjected to violence, exploitation, and the stripping of our land, culture, and sovereignty. While colonisation may have formally ended in many places, its effects live on today. What we are seeing in Nigeria right now, a government that operates as a puppet of foreign powers, exploiting its own people and resources for the benefit of multinational corporations, is a classic example of neo-colonialism. This is not just a Nigerian problem. This is a global issue. We, as First Nations peoples, are intimately familiar with the way that governments, corporations and foreign interests exploit our land and resources, all the while leaving us in poverty and disenfranchisement. The Nigerian government, in its pursuit of policies that enrich the elites and foreign investors, is doing the same thing, ensuring that the vast majority of Nigerians remain impoverished and oppressed. The recent wave of austerity measures, food scarcity and economic violence is a tool of control, just as we've seen here in so-called Australia, where our lands were taken, our resources extracted and our communities left to suffer. Let's talk about food. In Nigeria, hunger is being used as a weapon. Austerity measures, privatisation of essential services and economic policies that benefit the rich while crushing the poor are part of a strategy to keep people in submission. We know this all too well. Here in so-called Australia, we have seen the destruction of our traditional food sources, the closing of our communities and the systematic stripping of our resources. For us, food sovereignty is a matter of survival, and the same is true for the people of Nigeria. Their right to land, to resources and to food is being taken from them just as ours was. And then there is the arrest of activists. The Nigerian government has recently escalated its attacks on those who dare to speak out against the injustices being carried out. This is not an issue just for Nigeria, this is a global pattern. Across the world, those who fight for justice, for human rights, for a better future are criminalised and silenced. We have faced the same here in this colony. Our leaders, our elders, our activists, harassed, imprisoned and targeted for simply standing up for our rights, for our land and for our people. But we are not afraid and we will not be silenced. We stand with the people of Nigeria. We stand with their activists, their freedom fighters, their communities who are seeking resistance against the forces that seek to keep them impoverished and oppressed. Just as we fight for our right to land and sovereignty, we join them in their struggle for justice, for food security, for liberation from neo-colonial oppression. This is about self-determination. The people of Nigeria, like us, deserve to decide their own future. We are not here to beg for crumbs from the table of imperialist powers. We are here to reclaim our lands, our resources and our dignity. We are here to demand an end to the policies that benefit only the wealthy and the foreign powers while leaving our people to suffer. We are here to call for the freedom of every activist who has been jailed for speaking the truth. We are one struggle. Our fight is the same. We understand the pain of seeing our lands desecrated, our people marginalised and our voices silenced. But we also understand the power of unity, the power of collective action, the power of solidarity. When we stand together, we are unstoppable. So, to the people of Nigeria, to the activists, to the mothers, the fathers, the children, to all who are resisting, we say, we see you, we hear you, and we stand with you. Together, we will dismantle the structures of oppression that have held us down for so long. Together, we will build a future that is truly free and liberated for all of our people. But it is not enough to stand symbolically in solidarity. Real solidarity must come in the form of material support and real-world action. Reach deep into your pockets, donate back to the Global South whose plundering we directly benefit from as Westerners. Don't stop there, educate yourself, decolonise your own mind. The single greatest thing that any of us can do, whether it's for Nigeria, for Palestine, West Papua, Kanaki or anywhere else in the world, the single greatest thing we can do is to recognise our own role in upholding Western imperialism and this here Western colonial occupation that we all call home. So long as places like Australia continue to exist, the West will continue to have the stranglehold it does on the Global South. Reject the colony, refuse to contribute to and uphold its occupations and imperialism, and tell me it's great in your fucking head!
Africans have a right to resist US and all the imperialists. Africans have a right to resist US and all the imperialists. So I'm not very good at rhyming, but yeah. Thank you for that. As I said before, key to staying the hand of the blood-soaked Nigerian government in its repression against these EndBadGovernance activists is to be able to mobilise the voice and the power of the international union movement. I'd like to read here a motion passed, I think unanimously, by a monthly meeting of the Victorian branch of the Maritime Union of Australia on 29 October. The motion reads as follows. This meeting condemns the actions of the Bola Tinubu government of Nigeria. The MUA offers their full support and defence of the Nigeria Labour Congress and the Nigeria activists who are in jail facing the death penalty. We stand united with the working class movement of Nigeria and demand an end to the repression. I understand there is possibly people here from African Solidarity Collective if they wish to speak. No, not a problem. We very much appreciate their endorsement and support of this demonstration. I think probably the next speaker is from the Spartacist League.
Hello, comrades. Thank you all for coming out here today. In particular, thank you to the Partisan Defence Committee for calling this demonstration, as well as all the organizations who endorsed it. As you all know, hundreds of thousands of youth and unemployed has participated in the EndBadGovernance protest against the Tinubu government's starvation measures. This resulted in the bloody crackdown, which has included the shooting and killing of dozens, as well as the arrest of thousands of protesters. It is urgently necessary for the international workers' movement to fight against this murderous repression, to defend these protesters who are facing the death penalty over trumped-up treason charges. We in the Spartacist League say, drop the charges now, release all arrested protesters. As US hegemony increasingly breaks down, the American empire has been holding ever tighter to its decaying position, escalating confrontation with its enemies while squeezing its allies. Nowhere is this more felt than in the countries dominated by imperialism. In the Middle East, imperialists have backed Israel's genocide to maintain their Zionist enclave. In Kenya, the government attempted to impose IMF dictated tax laws, which they were forced to repeal in the face of opposition from thousands of Kenyan youth. In Nigeria, government measures to pay off imperialist-imposed debts has led to economic catastrophe and widespread starvation. And it was in reaction to this neoliberal austerity that the Nigerian masses mobilized to fight against this imperialist-induced shock therapy. In response, the Nigerian government has moved with rapacity to repress the Nigerian people and force through such rotten measures on behalf of imperialists. This is not only an outrageous assault on the working people of Nigeria, but a defense of the whole rotten world order that oppresses the working class from Lagos to here in Melbourne. This is why it's imperative for the working class of this country to champion the cause of national liberation of the Nigerian people and to defeat this wave of repression against the protesters. You know, while some argue that the working class of Australia benefit from imperialist oppression over the global south, this is far from the truth. Every blow by the Nigerian masses against the imperialist-backed Tinubu regime will in turn strengthen the capacity of the working class of this country to fight against Australian capitalism. In turn, one of the best things the working class of this country can do for the national liberation of Nigeria is to strike a blow against our own ruling class. This is sharply posed today with Albanese's Labour government backing its US big brother's every move while tightening the screws at home. While presiding over the cost of living, health and housing crises, the ALP has taken the hammer to the militant CFMEU, placing it under administration. This is one of the biggest attacks on the union movement in generations and is a threat against all who are looking to fight against Australia's liberal order. It is clear that the union leader strategy of occasional demos and appeals to the boss's court is no strategy for victory. We communists say it is not too late. Workers need to take the initiative, get organized and prepare to strike back. A struggle to throw off the administration would be a great victory for the labor movement and a blow against Australian capitalism, which plays an integral junior role to US hegemony, including its domination over Africa. But this requires nothing less than a determined political struggle against the current labor right trade union leadership, which has supported and paved the way for Albanese and his union-busting policies, something that has continued to bolster reaction. This has been especially felt in the US, in which the recent election showed not just the ascendancy of Donald Trump, but of right-wing reaction as a whole, a definitive blow to liberalism as the dominant ideology of the imperialist ruling classes. In the immediate period, what this means is further grinding down on the working class and all the oppressed. In this climate, defensive struggles like this one is imperative to fight back against this encroaching reaction. But beyond that, what's required is to offer a revolutionary path forward for the working class in a complete rupture with both liberalism and right-wing populism. Throughout Africa, there's the most critical task of fighting for revolutionary leadership of the national liberation struggle, the only leadership with the capacity to break the hold of the imperialist stranglehold over Africa. In Nigeria, this entails a ruthless struggle against the nationalist elites who at each turn betray the struggle in favor of their own petty comprador interests. Against the Nigerian lackeys of imperialists, we say workers must fight to reinstate the fuel subsidy, repudiate the debt to the imperialist bloodsuckers, and nationalize the oil fields, mines, and all imperialist assets. It is clear the Tinubu regime is feeling the heat. Already, a wave of protesters have had the death penalty charges against them dropped. Still, Opalawu, Ilojo Simeon, Michael Lennon, Adara Moi, and many other Nigerian socialists continue to be threatened with death and are said to be in court today. This is why it's so important to fight for this protest, which this is only one of many. From Britain to the US to Mexico, we are all mobilized here today to demand, drop the charges, free the jailed Nigerian protesters now. Thank you.
Drop the charges! Khoza! Khoza!
Drop the charges. No jail time. Fighting austerity, not a crime. Drop the charges. No jail time. Fighting austerity is not a crime. Drop the charges. No jail time. Fighting austerity, not a crime. Thank you. Now, one of the other endorsers of this protest could not be here today, but they asked that I read a statement on their behalf. This is the group that is called Class Conscious. This is their statement. Class Conscious would like to thank the Partisan Defence Committee for initiating this protest in defence of Nigerian workers and youth. We hope that this is part of building a non-sectarian united front movement in Melbourne who regularly fight together for workers' rights. The Nigerian socialists, unionists and youth being terrorised for taking part in the anti-government protests simply want what the working class of Australia want: decent housing, education, health and other basic social rights. They also face the same enemies, the capitalist bosses and the bought and sold politicians who serve them. Nigeria is a rich country in resources, but these resources are not owned or controlled for the benefit of the Nigerian people. Instead, the wealth flows to a few at home and the rest flows back to the same imperialists who have exploited Africa for 150 years. Just like with Palestine, the fight for our own liberation is linked to the fight for the workers of Nigeria and elsewhere in the exploited global south. We must stand together against our joint enemies and for our joint rights. We must embody the union principle, touch one, touch all, on an international scale. Drop all charges against the Nigerian protesters. One struggle, one fight. One struggle, one fight. Workers of the world, unite. One struggle, one fight. Workers of the world, unite. One struggle, one fight. Workers of the world, unite. One struggle, one fight. Workers of the world, unite. Thank you for coming to this protest. This is important. We are not many, but our voice is loud and proud. We will not lay down in the face of capitalist tyranny and oppression. This campaign is not over, and there are many others that also require your support. I urge you to spread the word on this case far and wide on social media, union newsletters and newspapers. We must break the blackout of news about this repression. Go back to your unions and community organisations and get letters of protest to let the Nigerian government know that the eyes of the world's working people are watching. If you haven't already, make sure to leave a contact number with the Partisan Defence Committee so we can contact you further about this campaign and other upcoming campaigns. Thank you.
Government. Why didn't you help Buhari to solve the problem? Debt under Buhari to 77 information. I'm not children I to pay for this evil. The not that Buhari was incompetent, but we still bring up to destroy Nigeria. Party government. Now you are the president. Buhari don't destroy Nigeria. We bring up to judgment.